Conversation with the Candidate continues.
Thank you for clicking on our extended digital conversation with the candidate. Bill de Blasio, the mayor of New York City, running for president. We're going to jump right back in to our questions from our town hall voters, and we're going to start with Ann Ackerman.
Hello, good
Hey, Ann.
evening.
How you doing?
What would you recommend to my college students to examine about the electoral process?
Oh, wow. And you are asking a big and important question. So I think for young folks in particular, we actually need to restore some hope. I think it has been a moment in history, and I say this to my own kids, 24 and 21 years old. Think of what they've come up with. They've come up with the threat of global warming, an existential threat deeper than anything that I think any other generation has previously experienced. We all grew up having to duck under the desks and do the air raid drills.
Remember 'em.
With us, yeah, and there was an honest fear, God forbid there was a nuclear war, but it was also something we did not, thank God, experience. Global warming, people are actually feeling it right now. They're feeling it right now. Every time Hurricane Sandy in New York was just devastating to our city. We lost dozens of people and neighborhoods literally just destroyed. And think about the wildfires and the floods and everything that people experienced around this country. Our young people came up with that. They came up with the Great Recession and the aftermath, the student debt crisis, which I can tell you, for all the thrifty New Englanders in the audience, my two kids are so thrifty, and it's because they grew up in that age of fear of debt. So I think today's young people are very sober, very serious about what they're dealing with, but we have to give them hope that these things can change. So the electoral process, for a lot of people, it has been over the years like, oh, you hear these famous lines, you must know them, oh, it doesn't matter if I vote, oh, the candidates are all alike, my vote won't change anything. Mm-hmm. Those are really dangerous ideas in a democracy. And I think it's up to all of us to go and show people that change can happen. And this is something I say, I'm mayor of the nation's largest city. It's not an easy place, but I'm actually more optimistic today than 6 years ago when I took office, because I've seen that you actually can change some of these things. We talked about pre-K for every child. That's one example. When you talk to the parents who never would have had pre-K for their kid, and then they got it, and they talk about how their child blossomed. And we saw it, in my family. My wife Charlene and I saw it with our daughter Kiara and our son Dante. That pre-K just changed their lives. They were blessed enough to have full-day pre-K. You see that something done through the political process. There was an election. Something changed because of that election. And it actually made people's lives better. And then people start to think, wait a minute, maybe my vote does matter. Maybe getting involved actually can change something. I think it's incumbent on all of us to help our young people recognize that they could reshape this country for the better. And their presence, particularly in the 2020 election, could be the decisive element. So I say, talk to people about the electoral process, but reminding them of the hope and the good in it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ann. Next question comes from Hella Ross.
Thank you, Adam. Hi, Mayor. Nice to see you.
Good to see you.
Thank you. The vast majority of your constituents do not support your presidential run. They want you to continue to address their many inner-city concerns to include deteriorating public housing, worsening homelessness, as well as the affordable housing crisis, not to mention the antiquated subway infrastructure. Please list your most major policy platforms that you've implemented during your 5.5-year tenure besides free pre-K school and a $15 minimum wage for New York City employees that qualify you to become president.
I want to speak to both pieces of your question really quickly. As I said, we're the safest big city in America, and that came from a series of decisions that I made working with our police leadership that fundamentally changed policing in New York City, made us safer, improved our social fabric. I mean, it all begins with safety and it all begins with health. That's one of the most fundamental things I've done. 500,000 more jobs in my city since I became mayor because we made the city safer. We improved the schools. We did a lot of the things that people wanted to see who were creating businesses, who were creating jobs, made it a better quality of life in our city. Improving our school system, not just with pre-K, we have the highest graduation rate we've ever had, and we keep seeing progress in terms of our ability to educate our children better. Biggest affordable housing program New York City's ever had. So I think the things I put into place have changed the lives of millions of people and across all of the different areas that really affect people's everyday lives. And I mentioned healthcare, the fact that we're guaranteeing healthcare for folks who don't have insurance. One of the biggest questions in this country, how does everyone get access to healthcare? We're finding a new way to do it right now in New York. To the issues you raised, they're very real issues. The subway system in New York, the mass transit system is run by the state of New York. But I worked with our governor, who I don't always agree with, but I worked with him. And we passed a very important new plan in April to fix our subways once and for all, to fund them properly. We proved we could get something done that had not been possible in the past. But the other issues you raise, along with mass transit, homelessness, affordable housing, public housing, here's another reason I'm running. I've been working hard on all those issues. But you can't do it alone in New York, and you can't do it alone in New Hampshire. We're not going to be able to fix these fundamental problems in our country by asking states and localities to somehow come up with the resources and the legal ability to do these things that we just don't have. And so the answer often is in Washington, D.C. But for decades, Washington, D.C. has been either paralyzed or unwilling to act. I'm running for president because I think we need to change this country. I can't fix the problems of my people without an active federal partnership. I think a lot of the problems here in New Hampshire cannot be fixed if the federal government is not involved directly and actively, and it hasn't been. So I say to people in my city, I'm running because we need a very different dialogue in this country. We need a very different vision of what can be done. I say, as a proud Democrat, our party needs to present something different if we expect to win. And if we don't do those things right, then unfortunately I'll do everything I know how to do to help my people have a better life. But like every other leader in America, I'll have one hand tied behind my back because the federal government will not be there.
I see.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you, Helen.
Appreciate
very
it.
much.
Appreciate it. Next question comes from Kenneth Berlin.
Hi, Mayor. Welcome.
Hey,
How are
Kenneth.
you?
How's it going?
Okay, thank you. This is a little different type subject.
All right. We got variety.
And I reworded it, so I'm hoping I get it right. How would you go about restoring our maligned intelligence agencies that have been verbally abused by this president? And how would you get back the respect, the trust, and morale that they have been hurting on and that they need to get back to where they were prior to him taking office? And in that vein, are there any people, and I know you won't, but are there any people or types of people who you would like to have in your cabinet as like Secretary of State, a CIA director, Homeland Security director? You don't have to give me names,
Right.
but are you looking, do you have anybody in mind or people that could fit that?
Sure. Kenneth, first of all, you're hitting such an important point, because think about the threats that we face as Americans right now. We have seen the impact of terror in this country, and no one knows it better than those of us in New York who went through 9/11. And the fact that we're still the #1 terror target in America informs my thinking all along that we need a highly respected, engaged intelligence community and leadership of that community that we show a lot of respect for, and most importantly, listen to. And there'll be different viewpoints. That's okay. That's democracy, right? Any elected leader is supposed to listen to different viewpoints, make the best decision for the people. But the fact is, all of those institutions we depend on have been under attack by this president. And it's corrosive. And a lot of great leaders, a lot of great people who work to help all of us have been leaving because they don't feel they can do their job anymore. So that's not acceptable. And I can tell you, working with some of the greatest intelligence folks and public safety folks in this country and working closely with our federal partners, if you show overt respect, if you say we're all in this together, if the leader sends that message, you can heal. You can overcome it. I know a lot of great people who would do wonderful work in the cabinet, in the intelligence community as well. I'm not going to name names. You're right. You're a smart man. But I can tell you there's no lack of great public servants in this country. I want folks who are going to focus on cooperation between all pieces of the intelligence community and our public safety apparatus, which again has not been the case for too long. We've missed some really some tragedies happen because things were missed because of rivalries between agencies. I want folks who are going to create collaboration and mutual respect. We've done that in New York. We have huge agencies, often didn't get along. We've said, hey, everyone, we're wearing the same uniform here. But we also have to do that in our relationship with the rest of the world. And repairing those alliances and getting the intelligence communities of our allied countries to really work in concert with us. That's how we protect ourselves going forward. Thank God there's still a lot of people who want to do that work. And I actually think a lot of people, when they get told it's all clear, we're going back to some normalcy and some respect, a lot of people will come in and be ready to do that work to serve their nation.
Good.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ken. Next question comes from Nancy Keene.
Hey, Nancy.
Well, thank you for coming here and giving us this wonderful opportunity.
Thank you very much.
We keep hearing the words entitlement when they talk about Social Security rather than a pension plan that we are entitled to
Yep.
and we have paid for all of our working lives. And I keep hearing that it's going to run out by 2034. I hope I'll still be around then. So what are you going to do to protect Social Security?
I really appreciate that question. You will be around.
I hope.
Okay, I have faith. This is something that so many people are worried about, who have worked so hard. And it gets back to this whole point. People have worked hard their whole life and now don't feel secure, which is not what this country should allow. Right? We're supposed to be a place where folks who worked hard to get, especially those folks who worked hard their whole life to get to the middle class and they thought they were there, that they can actually have a secure retirement. I have to say, this is very personal for me because my mom worked her whole life. For a lot of my upbringing, she was the single parent and she worked hard and she thought she had put together a secure retirement. And one day in the 1980s, after she had retired, a letter came from the last company she worked for saying her pension was canceled. And this, I have such respect for my mom, may she rest in peace. She worked so hard, she did everything right. And the shock that she felt, that something she thought was signed, sealed, delivered, was just gone in an instant. And she felt powerless. And I think a lot of people right now are going through that with Social Security. They don't know what's going to happen. So here's what I say. First of all, raise the income cap. Raise the income cap so we can put the resources into Social Security that should be there to begin with. And it's another example of how the federal government has favored those who already have a lot of money time and time again. And then on top of that, if there needs to be federal backing, there should be for something as essential as the retirement of tens of millions of people. This gets back to this point, and I make it because we've kind of got to jolt ourselves into recognition. We've been sold a bill of goods. For 40 years, working class people, middle class people in America have essentially been stuck in place. Just look at real wages, real income, essentially been stuck. While the wealthiest, the corporations, Wall Street, they've been doing great. They've been doing better than ever. That phrase we all grew up with, the rich get richer, has come true in a way we haven't seen in 100 years in this country. We've got to change it. So when it comes to spending money on the retirement of hardworking people, anyone who says entitlement, like it's a dirty word, anyone who says there's not enough money, we can't do that, I say there's plenty of money in this world. And there's plenty of money in this country. It's just in the wrong hands. The folks who did that hard work deserve a secure retirement. And we've got to be blunt about that. There's no compromising on that. And as a Democrat, I not only believe that I think that's right for people, but I also believe if you want to talk about how we change things in 2020, Democrats have to say it as plainly as that. There's no way in the world we're going to allow Social Security to be compromised, because that's not something Republicans can say. Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you very
Nancy.
much.
We have a question along these same lines coming in from the online world. On Facebook, Frank Falco asks, when you say you'll tax the rich, what's the bottom baseline for being rich, and what's the rate they're going to pay?
So I start over $1 million. That's where you see the increases under my tax plan. At $2 million and above, it goes back to the rates that were common in this country in the 1950s and 60s. And why do I say that? Because, first of all, I want people to understand, here we're in a country today where we're worried about whether Social Security will be there, where hardworking people are not getting ahead. There's tremendous fear about the future, and people can't pay for the health care they need, And this is not the quality of life that Americans deserve. So we've got to do something different. When you look at a time in our history when we actually did pretty well at investing in people, at people having some sharing in the prosperity of our nation, well, that was in those years. And that tax rate, that higher tax rate for the wealthy, was one of the reasons why. It allowed the federal government to invest in infrastructure. Something that every state in this country needs is those investments, roads, bridges, mass transit, all the things that people need, but also that will determine whether we have a successful economy in the future. We're not going to be able to do that if we keep giving away the store to the wealthy and the corporations. So my tax plan says, let's go back to the one thing that actually worked. Fairer, higher taxes on the wealthy, not on working people, not on middle class people, on the folks who actually have gotten favored time and time again for decades. And it's not asking a lot. Look, if you got giveaway after giveaway after giveaway for decades, and then we come along and say, hey, it's time to give some of that back, that's not unfair in a world where so many working people are barely making ends meet. So I think this is what people want. By the way, it's an amazing thing that we should give credit to all Americans for. When you ask this question of Americans all over the country, Democrats, Republicans, and independents, are the wealthy paying their fair share in taxes? You find clear majorities, all parties, all philosophies, all regions of the country. And yet we just saw the biggest tax giveaway to the wealthy and corporations in a generation 2 years ago. That needs to be repealed. We need to put the tax rates in place that actually demand of the wealthy a fair share. And that's how we start to transform this country.
Next question comes from Jesse Aubin.
Hi, sir.
Hey, Jesse.
I'm also a father. I have 2 boys, 12 and 8. And one of them's autistic. So he often uses assistive technology to do schoolwork and use the web. In late June, a report came out that found that none of the presidential candidate websites, Republican or Democrat, were fully accessible to the disabled and the technologies they use. And then I did a little more digging, and you find out that there's over almost 40 million disabled voters in the U.S. So I'm like, well, when my son's at the age when he can make that decision, in today's landscape, he couldn't be properly up to speed and know the candidates because he can't access their websites, which is a big source of information on you guys. So my question is, would you commit to improving your website so it's fully accessible and challenge the other candidates to do the same?
Jesse, thank you. First of all, as a parent, I just want to say, bringing up kids, being a parent is not easy anytime. And it's not easy in this day and age, I would argue. But when you have a child with a special need, there's even much more that you have to deal with. I just want to say to you, my respect, because it's not easy, but thank you for what you do to support your family. So first of all, yes, I accept, and I'm sorry that we hadn't done that already, and we will fix it on our website, and I'll challenge the other candidates, but I'll do you one better. The City of New York, I'll instruct our folks to fix the websites there if they don't have that capacity as well, because it's a really important point, and hopefully that will help encourage everyone. I do want to say that you're right, there's a huge number of people in this country who have gone unrecognized, tens of millions of folks with disabilities. And these issues should be front and center in this election. And what I found as a chief executive, there's a lot of things we can do differently. For kids on the autism spectrum, we have found our public school system has created a whole host of new schools, like literally schools or programs within schools that really work. Public schools that are serving those kids in ways that was not done even 10 years ago. That's something we should do all over the country. And broader level for folks with disabilities, we found that there's a really important role for government to play, both hiring with people with disabilities, encouraging, incentivizing, pushing the private sector to do the same, making sure mass transit's more accessible. One of the things we did in New York is we said to the taxi industry that half of the taxi cabs had to be wheelchair accessible, another type of disability, but it changed everything for folks in terms of getting around. So I hope, and I believe these issues will be front and center in this election. We have some real examples of change that people, I hope, can be inspired by. But I will take your really powerful point and use it as a reason to go and address this better.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jesse. Next question comes from Elizabeth Radisich.
Hey, Elizabeth.
Hi, good evening. Thank you for being here tonight, Mayor.
you.
I'm known for asking really, really tough questions,
I'm ready,
and
Elizabeth.
I totally had one prepared for about your approval rating in New York, but Saturday I had a moment with my family and you where you made an impact, and so I'm going to give you an opportunity to speak on that impact.
Thank
And
you.
that was because we were at a picnic. And you came up to my two little children, who were the only little black kids at the picnic, 3.5-year-old twins, and you came up to my daughter and said, "Hello, beautiful." And for a girl of color who doesn't hear that in an all-white area, that was huge. And so my question is, how do you feel that as your roles as a husband and a father in a biracial family, how has that prepared you to lead in such a racially divided nation?
Thank you. And I'm really happy that, for her that meant something. And that's one of the lessons I learned, being in a multiracial family. I think as Americans, we're trying to still learn each other. We're trying to still understand all the people that make up this country, just from our own personal experience. And when I first started dating my wife, Shirlane, we're now, by the way, we're celebrating 25th wedding anniversary this year, so come a long way, and it's been a beautiful, beautiful marriage. But when we first started dating, I was so nervous to understand what to say, what I understood, what I didn't understand, how do I navigate all this? And in fact, she took me home after a few months. At Christmas time, she took me to her mom's house with her family, and then the next day was Kwanzaa. And I had never celebrated Kwanzaa. I had heard of it. But I'm like, well, what are you supposed to do in Kwanzaa? And I have to say her family was both very patient and kind of bemused at the same time. And it became this beautiful thing of folks talking through like, okay, we know we don't know each other. How do we bridge that? And that's a conversation I think we have to have in this whole country. I actually think we can. And I think the generation coming up is showing us all an amazing lesson of much more openness, much more desire to connect with each other and respect each other. So I'm hopeful. But another point that I learned in my marriage is for so long, people of color in this country have been treated like there's something wrong with them. And my wife talked about this very point, that she grew up thinking she wasn't pretty. She grew up thinking like there was something wrong with her because of the color of her skin, and that things couldn't work out for her. She was very smart. She ended up going to Wellesley. She's a wonderful woman, and with what you could tell would have been filled with promise from the beginning, but she felt all the messages around her said there was something wrong with her. And so I think if we say to our children from the beginning, they're beautiful, they're wonderful, they're special, they're our future, and we back it up, like give them the support they need, and that's why things like pre-K matter so much. I think we can change that atmosphere in this country. I really think we can. But I'll tell you that it's been a journey. And one of the things that has allowed me to govern the most diverse place on earth, it really is, I mean, New York is everyone, is going through that humble journey and learning what I didn't know. And learning that sometimes it's as small but important a thing as just showing that love and respect for someone that they haven't felt a whole lot of, that opens minds, opens doors to a better future.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Along these same lines, obviously the obstacles faced by African Americans are enormous. Share with us a personal adversity you faced in your own life that has made you a better leader.
I talked about this, and it was hard to talk about it in the first debate. So, I grew up in a household that was very, very troubled. And it was troubled because the man I looked up to, my dad, who was a decorated war hero from World War II, and I had tremendous respect for what he had done. He volunteered after Pearl Harbor. He was in the U.S. Army in the Pacific from the beginning of the war to the very last battle, Okinawa. And that horrible, horrible battle, he lost half of his leg to a grenade on Okinawa, and he came back a very different person, physically in pain, physically struggling, but as I was growing up, I saw the other part of it, which was what we now call PTSD. They didn't call it that then. And you could see before your very eyes, as a child, this guy I looked up to, just watching him decline. And he was depressed, he became an alcoholic, and in the end, when I was 18 years old, he took his life. And, you know, we have to understand that for all of those who serve us, anyone who serves us in combat and comes home with these challenges, and for my dad, this is the case, the battle didn't kill him, but the war did. It played out over a long, long time. So growing up with that, I think it made me understand there are so many people who need help. My dad, you know, he was offered help and he kept saying he didn't need it. And we didn't have a good enough mental health system either that made it easy to get help. And that's another thing that really woke me up to the fact there's so much that has to change. Because even if he had been receptive, there weren't that many places that he could have gone. And I think going through an experience like that, for me, of course, it was it was sad, always, and you know, you could understand if someone went through that and said, I don't have a lot of hope, but I found some hope in the end because I just felt like it didn't have to be this way. And that has been sort of the reason I do this from that moment on. Was just people should not have to go through that. Families should not have to go through that.
Next question comes from Benjamin Pelletier.
Hello, Mayor.
Hey, Benjamin.
According to a New York Times article in early June, Donald Trump and yourself have high negative approval ratings in the state of New York. In a poll at the time, Donald Trump had an approval rating of 34% and a disapproval rating of 63%. You had an approval rating of 29% and a disapproval rating of 53%. The difference in net negative ratings is only 5%. How will you beat Donald Trump in a general election if he is more favorable than you in your own state?
Well, first of all, I appreciate the question, but I've learned there's only one poll that matters, and it's the one where everyone participates. And I am someone who, time and time again, I've been an underdog in every election I've been in. If you looked at the polling, you know, you wouldn't have given me the time of day. But the people make their own judgments, and they make them over time, seeing what someone has done. I'm in a place everyone knows with really tough issues, a very tough news media. It's an environment that, bluntly, it's not easy, but it's a really good preparation for dealing with the big issues and the conflicts ahead. I would caution that, yeah, being a leader sometimes comes with positive approval, negative, you go through all that, but it's a lot better to have walked through that fire, to gone through making the tough decisions, dealing with the crises before becoming President of the United States and having a whole world to have to think about than never having stood in those shoes. So the poll that matters, the one that the people actually participate in, I got elected mayor of New York City with 73% of the vote, and a year and a half ago reelected with 67% of the vote. After 4 years of service, almost the exact same number of people chose to keep me in office. And that, to me, is what really tells you what people think of the work. I also think that when people in the course of this campaign hear a vision that means something to them and know it's backed up by experience, that's going to mean a whole lot. And I say this about the people of New Hampshire I've spoken to, who are tremendous interviewers and vetters and take so seriously this role, that in the end, people don't want to just hear words. They want to know you've done something with it. And sometimes making change is going to come with some controversy. But if you actually change people's lives, it's not just a policy paper, it's actual change in people's lives, including taking on some very powerful interests. I think that says who you really are. And our nominee, the Democratic nominee, is going to be put through their paces and scrutinized, and they better be able to show that they mean business, that they actually stand for what they say, and I have the ability to do that. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Benjamin. And Mr. Mayor, that wraps up our half
right,
hour
Adam.
digitally here on
Thank
Conversation
you.
with the Candidate. Thank you for joining us. Thank you to our town hall audience for all of your questions, and thanks you, the folks at home, for watching. Have a
Thank
good
you,
one.
everybody.